中国驻芝加哥总领事馆，您好，您有一封文件尚未领取，如需查询，请按9，将有专人为您服务。
Hibakashu, or in the literal Japanese translation, survivors of the bomb. Hibakashu were survivors of the atomic bombings of either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and through their witnessing of the horrors of that day, came within them a compellment to speak out against the use of nuclear weapons and the tragedies that come with it. From this tradition of Hibakashu literature came the poet Araki Yasusada. In the 1990s, Araki Yasusada's poetic work began appearing in numerous magazines and journals across the country, most notably in the American Poetry Review, which is a pretty good journal you should check out, by the way. And his works were seen as true testimony and witness to the Hiroshima bombing, as well as being both beautiful and tragic. Within each of his poetic submissions, the following biography was attached with it. Yasusada was born in 1907 in the city of Kyoto, where he lived until 1921. When his family moved to Hiroshima, he attended Hiroshima University sporadically between 1925 and 1928 with the intent of receiving a degree in Western literature. Due, however, to his father's illness, he was forced in the interest of his family to undertake full-time employment with the Postal Service and withdraw from his formal studies. In 1930, he married his only wife Nomura, with whom he had 2 daughters and a son. In 1936, Yasusada was conscripted into the Japanese Imperial Army and worked as a clerk in the Hiroshima Division of the Military Postal Service. His wife and youngest daughter, Chaiko, died instantly in the atomic blast on August 6th. His daughter Akiko survived, yet perished less than 4 years later from radiation sickness. His son Yasunari, an infant at the time, was with relatives outside the city. Yasusada died in 1972 after a long struggle with cancer. They also included a charcoal sketch of Araki Yasusada where he looks like a hard motherfucker. Like look at those eyes. Like he's seen some shit. So it also added to the mystique that these journals had of him or when they received his submission. Even the great poet Ron Silman said this about Araki Yasusada's work. He said he was a poet whose work simply took his breath away, and that these works kept him up late at night and probably would for another night or 3. Although Ron Silman likely read numerous poems from the manuscript, I believe that the following poem I'm about to present to you also created this feeling within him. Trilobytes. December 15th, 1949, I dedicate this poem to the potter Sakataro Ishihara. Only last month I was drunk with him in koi at the Soto bar. He had come from his treatment and seemed overly excited. Suddenly from his burlap bag he raised a concave stone and placed it gently in the space between us. "And what have we here?" I said with a great curiosity. "The fossils of trilobites," he whispered, leaning forward as if sharing a sexual secret. The waiter appeared over us, clutching a vase of sake, his long geisha nails like contrails against the black lacquer. "Where on earth did you come upon this?" I inquired. "Why, at the Central Museum, a fossil collection donated by the Americans, a challenge to get past the guards." We both laughed deeply then, and for a moment I could see beneath the scarred flesh the beautiful face of his youth. I gazed at him, gazing at the fossil, the clumps of hair on his skull, the hands curled into claws. Was he thinking of his pottery, all of it, scattered into atoms? This morning I cradled the stone through the ruins, past the shadows of bodies, and bowing to his memory, placed it, soundlessly, at the epicenter. So I'm not going to give you no English teacher BS about why I like this poem, but I like this poem because I think it starts with an interesting premise. You have 2 guys meeting at a bar, and one of them has stolen a fossil from an exhibit. So it's kind of humorous set up in that way. And then you have an interesting comparison between the ancientness and the extinction of that fossil creature with that of the Hiroshima survivor. And then I think there's a very beautiful act of friendship and kinship when, after his friend passes away, Yasusada takes the stone to the epicenter of the Hiroshima blast. So he's walking through all kind of these horrors that he's seen in the past, the shadows of victims kind of imprinted onto the ground, and he places it in the middle of all that and bows to it. I think that's a very beautiful act of respect. And also the narrative form really makes it easy to read, and I appreciate that. After sharing this poem, I hope you understand a little bit about what these journals and magazines saw when they read his work. The thing, though, about Araki Yasusada is that he shares something in common with both your Jordans and your wife's orgasm. The answer being that they are all fake. As Araki Yasusada's poetic manuscript began being considered for publication by Wesleyan University Press, rumors began to circulate that perhaps Araki Yasusada wasn't a Hiroshima survivor, and more so, that he wasn't even a Japanese man. Rumor was that he was a white guy named Kent Johnson, who was a community college professor. We actually have rare footage of the Japanese translators as well as Kent Johnson meeting with Wesleyan Press to discuss the publication of the book, and here is it now.
Es war ein Scherz. Scherz? Nein, natürlich störe ich. Natürlich störe ich. Meine Herrschaften, gestatten Sie, dass ich Ihnen nachschenke, und dann werde ich Ihnen und dem Fräulein Adieu sagen. Erik hat eine Flasche 33 Jahre alten Whisky aus dem schottischen Hochland. Was sagen Sie, meine Herrschaften?
Das ist sehr freundlich, Sturmbannführer.
Erik, der 33er! Und frische Gläser! Wir wollen ja nicht, dass Sie den 33er hier mit Ihrem Gesöfter verseuchen.
Wie viele Gläser?
5. Für mich nicht. Ich mag Scotch, Scotch mag mich nicht.
Ich auch nicht, ich bleib beim Shampoos.
3 Gläser.
As rumor that Araki Yasusada was in fact Kent Johnson began to spread even more and more, Wesleyan University Press dropped publishing the Araki Yasusada manuscript, which was to be titled Doubled Flowering, and all the journals and magazines demanded their payment back. And they demanded their payment back specifically from Kent Johnson. One editor even called this a criminal act. So how the hell were they able to figure out that Araki Yasusada was in fact Kent Johnson? It's not like they were FBI agents or something. They had a secret poetry division or whatnot. They were able to figure out that Kent Johnson was Araki Yasusada through the facts that were placed in the manuscript itself. In Japanese naming conventions, the family name comes first and the personal name comes last. So Araki would be our last name and Yasusada would be our first name. But strangely, the Japanese translators regularly referred to the poet as Yasusada. It's kind of like referring to Abraham Lincoln if you were talking about him as just Abraham. It's a bit strange. The second is, if you look at his manuscripts, you can see that he is so involved in the poetry scene. He's regularly collaborating with ring poets. He's involved in 2 of the avant-garde groups of the times, but he never bothered to even try to publish his work. And if you read his manuscript, you can see he's like, oh, I'm just a shy guy. I don't want to, I'm just so embarrassed about publishing my work. But then you see that fucking sketch of him, and like, this is like apparently a badass motherfucker, but he's too scared to publish his work because he's embarrassed. It's just a little hard to believe. Well, the third reason is, if you read his biography, he says he attended Hiroshima University in 1925 through 1928 and was trying to get a degree in Western literature. And I know it says he attended sporadically. Well, that means he definitely attended very sporadically, because Hiroshima University was not founded until 1949. And English and French literature or Western literature was not a degree in Japan. It was simply an academic subject. So for someone to say, I'm getting a degree in Western literature in Japan, it almost seems like an American representation of what a Japanese person might do. A key part of the manuscript is Yasusada writing letters to the dead poet Jack Spicer after being heavily influenced by him. But the weird thing is, he was inspired by him in the mid-1960s. So first off, Yasusada would be in his late 50s at the time, and at that time, Jack Spicer in the US wasn't a really well-known poet. He appeared in 0 anthologies, and it might have been possible for him to know of Jack Spicer, but he would likely be the only poet in Japan who knew of him or showed a demonstrable interest. Possibly one of the most damning pieces of evidences that comes up is that when Yasusada is writing a letter to his friend, he recommends a number of Bay Area beat poets, except for one whose name is Howard McCord. Now, weirdly enough, Howard McCord was Kent Johnson's college mentor at Bowling Green University. So the fact that Kent Johnson's mentor randomly appears in these supposedly historic Japanese letters is almost absurd. Why did Kent Johnson put these obvious errors in building this hoax if he didn't want to be caught? Does he have a weird humiliation kink or what? Like, why did he put these clues that would obviously unravel his story? I think if we want to have a further understanding of why Kent Johnson perhaps did what he did, I think we need to look at Brian McHale's essay, A Poet May Not Exist, Mock Hoaxes and the Construction of a National Identity. So a genuine hoax is a fabrication carried out with no intention of being exposed. So an example of this would be the Hitler Diaries, where a series of 60 volumes of journals purportedly written by Adolf Hitler were in fact forged by an author in order to make $3.7 million. These things are inauthentic and have no intention of having their inauthenticity revealed. Trap hoaxes are intended to embarrass or expose something to an audience so that they come out with a specific point of view or lesson learned. An example of this being the Grievance Studies affair, where 3 academics wrote purposefully bad academic articles regarding gender, one of them being dog humping incidents can be seen as evidence of rape culture, so that they could expose the publication practices in journals regarding gender. So mock hoaxes are hoaxes that are aesthetic in intent and more or less provide hints that they are in fact hoaxes. So they use authenticity and inauthenticity as a way of making art. So one of the most famous examples of this being Fernando Pessoa. He wrote in numerous false identities to create poems. Brian McHale puts the Araki Yasusada incident under this hoax frame. In Araki Yasusada's final letter to Jack Spicer, this question of inauthenticity comes to a head. Yasusada, in his final letter, ponders what does it mean to write to a dead person who will never read this letter and kind of create this fictitious version of Jack Spicer. What does it mean to have this dialogue with someone who doesn't exist and is simply in his head? What does it mean to consult with the inauthentic? Here is the possible culprit himself, Kent Johnson, reading an excerpt from these letters to you.
On the stage, Roscius was a false Hecuba by choice, a true man by nature, but by that choice also a true tragic actor because he fulfilled his purpose, yet a false Priam because he imitated Priam but was not he. And now from this comes something amazing, which however no one doubts. That all these things are true in some respects, and that only the fact that they are false in one sense helps them toward their truth. Hence, they cannot in any way arrive where they would be or should be if they shrink from being false. For how could the actor I mentioned be a true tragic actor if he were not willing to be a false Hector, a false Andromache, a false Hercules? Or how could a picture of a horse be a true picture unless it were a false horse? Or an image of a man in a mirror be a true image unless it were a false man? So if the fact that they are false in one respect helps certain things to be true in another respect, why do we fear falseness so much and seek truth as such a great good?
Kent Johnson went on to further explain that the creation of the Yasusada character was a means and an attempt to create radical empathy by inhabiting a character and a person who had suffered such an unspeakable tragedy. Now, despite Kent Johnson's attempt to explain the Yasusada character by means of inauthenticity and radical empathy, not everyone was willing to drink the atomic Kool-Aid, so to speak. Many people had grievances, and here were a few of them. Some people felt that what Kent Johnson was doing by impersonating someone as tragic of a figure as the Hiroshima survivor was out of bounds. Others thought that writing Araki Yasusada as a deferential Japanese man kind of continued stereotypes of Japanese people and culture, and others felt that by presenting Araki Yasusada as authentic, he was pushing away actual experiences, true lived experiences of Hiroshima poets and survivors to the wayside. A group of Asian writers stated that what Kent Johnson was doing was an act of yellowface that demonstrated a great ignorance of Japanese poetry. They saw that what Kent was doing was wanting to have the benefits of such notoriety with the scandal without suffering any of the repercussions of a scandal. So Kent Johnson kind of wanted to have his cake and eat it too from their point of view. And they saw this as a great act of selfishness rather than an act of empathy and relation to the Hibakashu. Some people who supported Kent Johnson, such as Marjorie Perloff, a famous poetry critic, felt that there were no sacred cows, no sacred subjects that couldn't be talked about, and that everything was on the table, and that the editorial community was expressing a deep hypocrisy by wanting to publish a work that they initially thought was good, but then changing their mind after finding out that it was fictitious. As Marjorie Perloff put it, if they thought it was such good writing, they should still think it was good writing. However, scholars and academics of Japanese such as John Salt felt that the Araki Yasusada work was Japanized crap, and that it plays into the American idea of what is interesting about Japanese culture. But what did an actual Japanese person think about the whole Araki Yasusada affair? Well, in 1997, Kent Johnson actually had a correspondence with Akatashi Nagahata, an associate professor of English at Nagoya University, and he had the following things to say about the whole Araki Yasusada work. I presume the author of the Yasusada manuscript had a good intention in fabricating a fictional Hibakashu poet, and feel that his desire to be identified with an anonymous victim would be a sincere one. But I think it would be difficult, especially for the real Hibakashu people, to understand that circulating a false identity as if it were a real one, or being published as a Hibakashu poet, is an act of sympathy with real Hibakashu. It seems to be a little too easy and self-complacent as a style of expression for sympathy. After all, publishing as a Hibakashu does not endanger his position at all, but enhances his chance of publication. The project, in other words, seems to lack the anguish and pain commensurable to those the real Hibakashu went through. Besides, the sympathy with the Hibakashu is mixed up with the author's other interests, most notably a desire to write postmodern poetry. In consequence, the edge of criticism against the dropping of the A-bombs and of the warning for the danger of nuclear weapons seems to be lost. I think what the professor is trying to say is that the author of the Yasusada character is inadvertently expressing his own personal interests instead of that of the interest of a Hibakashu at the time. So let's just say my made-up example here that some guy named Sonic Fan 6969 is commissioned to create a work in the perspective of a Hibakashu. And they do a valiant attempt at it. They write it all out. But when you read it, you just can't help noticing all these Hiroshima survivors talking about Sonic fan fiction. And I don't believe that would be entirely accurate to their experiences at the time. So for the Yasusada character, we have the author expressing interests in Roland Barthes, Jack Spicer, postmodern lyrical poetry, or postmodern lyric poetry, and other Western thought. So it might be a bit too easy to say that this is an act of empathy when there's kind of a distance between how they embody a Hiroshima survivor or a Hibakashu. The Yasusada archive is a writing presented in the name of a Hiroshima witness. It does include clues to its own fictionality, but the fact remains that the text made the readers expect a true account of the Hiroshima survivor, and has betrayed that expectation. The Yasusada material, a fiction in the guise of a truth-claiming writing, thus breached the generic convention in which the authenticity of the author contributes to its truth claim, and I still believe this generic convention is important. I think what the professor is trying to say is that there's an inherent trust between the reader and the author when it comes to books about facts. So when there's a breach of trust, it's a big issue. So to put this in layman's terms, let's say Coca-Cola sells you this Coke here, right? And you pop it open, you drink it, and once you drink it, you realize it tastes like piss, and then you're like, what the hell? So you look at the ingredients on the back, and it says 99% piss, 1% caramel coloring. And so you try to sue Coke or something, and then they say, well, actually, it says it's piss on there, so it's kind of your fault for buying it and drinking it. And then you're going to say, well, it looks like a Coca-Cola, just like a cola, it has the color of Coke. Why isn't this Coca-Cola, So you can't really put the entire blame on the reader, I guess, for being upset. Though if I were to give a more accurate representation of the Araki Yasusada manuscript, it would be more like a Mr. Pibb rather than a Mr. Piss. Now, despite the Araki Yasusada manuscripts being panned critically by the poetry community at large, Kent Johnson was stubborn as ever and never admitted that he was the one who wrote the Araki Yasusada manuscripts, and he insisted that it was the translator Motokyu who in fact wrote it, and that also was a pseudonym, and that writer was long dead. There have even been some theories that perhaps it was a Russian author or a Russian poet who in fact created the Yasusada identity in conjunction with Kent Johnson. Now, we may never know officially who created the Araki Yasusada manuscript, especially now that Kent Johnson has passed away. But I think that he would like this. I think Kent Johnson would be happy with this situation. I think Kent would be happy because the whole Araki Yasusada incident encouraged readers to actively seek out and examine more closely the true testimonies of Hiroshima poets, authors, and survivors, and by closely analyzing them to see what the difference was between the Yasusada manuscript and the real lived experiences of Hiroshima survivors, they were able to come to a more full understanding of the experience of a Hibakashu than they would have had otherwise without the hoax. I think Kent Johnson would also be happy knowing that the anonymous nature of the poet is forever secured, and through this anonymity comes a ubiquity. Anyone could have written this manuscript, and they could have come from anywhere. And with this ubiquitous nature, this means that anyone could have expressed a desire to understand, and anyone could have expressed a desire to be empathetic to someone who has suffered so much. And is it really wrong to seek out this desire, to attempt to be empathetic, to attempt to understand, even though you may fall short? Now, I would like to end this video as you continue to ponder these questions. with the final thoughts of Kent Johnson on the Araki Yasusada situation, as well as provide the voice of the people who inspired this work to even come into existence in the first place, the Hibakashu themselves.
Yasusada then, I believe, points in a doubled direction toward the heroic historical testimony of survivors that is its wellspring, and towards us in this distance, who, knowing deep down as we do that Hiroshima's fate could yet be ours as well, yearn to understand and never, hopefully, fully will. Okay, thank you.
Hey, thank you again for watching Poetry Taught Poorly. What do you guys think about the whole Araki Yasusada affair? Do you think that this was kind of a question about radical empathy? Do you think this was a dialogue about inauthenticity and inauthenticity? Or do you just think this was a plain hoax and a fraud? Let me know that in the comments below. I'll be sure to respond and read them. And if you're interested in more poetry-related content, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for letting us teach you a little bit about poetry, albeit poorly. Bye, guys.